He was talking to his disciples. This was a significant place for Jesus, the Mount of Olives. This is a place where he came to pray. He would often either come here in the evening and spend the night praying to his Father, or he'd come out early in the morning. He'd get away from people so that he could be in this place where it was quiet and he had solitude to speak with his Father. And maybe if it was a cemetery, that kind of makes sense, because cemeteries aren't usually filled with people either in the evening or in the morning, right? It's a quiet place. Maybe that's why he chose it. But it was a place that he often taught spiritual truths to the people who gathered to hear him. If people followed him up there, he'd teach them there as well. And it was here that he made the triumphal entry into Jerusalem as he prepared himself to sacrifice his life for us. And this was the spot where his disciples had seen him ascend back to heaven after his resurrection. And the thing is about this chapter, this particular story about these 10 bridesmaids, it comes after there's a couple of chapters where the Pharisees and the Sadducees are just trying to get at Jesus. They're trying to trap him with words, trap him with rules and regulations, and trying to get him to say something that they could convict him on easily. And so it comes in this story comes in this space where he's seen through what people's motives are and why they're trying to get at him. And so he actually directly speaks to what those people are doing. He warns against hypocrisy, and he says talks about the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, and he gives these 7 woes to the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. He speaks about some of the things that are coming, the kind of destruction that was going to happen to the temple. He speaks about the end times, and the disciples are hearing all of this stuff, all of this doom and gloom language coming from Jesus. And he's talking about the destruction of the temple and the suffering that maybe the disciples were going to face. And so I think they started to worry about, like, how long is this going to go on for, Jesus? Like, is this going to be, like, is this like the rest of our lives? What's going on? And I think they wanted to ask Jesus what was going on. So in this moment, the disciples ask him this question: what will be the sign of your coming and the end of this age? Like, when's all of this doom and gloom going to come to an end, Jesus? They're saying, when are you coming back to put an end to all this and take us, to heaven? When are we going to get to that spot? And in answer to their question, Jesus tells them this parable, this story, to help them try and understand what he's trying to get them to think about, other than just getting me out of here. And so he tells them this parable about the 10 bridesmaids. And again, he's trying to help them understand this concept about his kingdom that he's introducing, that we spoke about last week. His purpose was to introduce his kingdom to people. And so again, he keeps telling these parables that sort of reveal a bit more of what he's talking about, what he's really bringing for people to understand. And so he says, at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. But 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but they didn't take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. But at midnight the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and they trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out." But they replied, "No, there may not be enough for both of us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived, and the virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you." "Therefore," Jesus said, "keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Who loves a good wedding? Like, for those of you who are married or were married, how good was your wedding? Was it great? Was it the best one ever? Like, I think our wedding was pretty awesome. Like, it was pretty fun. My middle name, Eugene, was revealed for the first time when we got married. And my sister-in-law, recorded on video, went standing there right up the front. It was actually really, really funny, and I give her heaps about that. So what's wrong with Eugene? It's a very, very important name. But weddings are fun. You get to celebrate love. You get to celebrate family. You get to celebrate the incredible meaning of two people bringing their lives together to form a unity and a family and this new existence together. Mel and I do quite a few weddings. Like, we've both got our celebrants licence. So over the past year, we've done so many weddings, but we've also had the honour and the privilege of doing the premarital courses with a lot of those couples. And so you get to really help them to see what kind of a celebration a wedding can really be, and to get them to think about, the beauty of what that represents. But the kind of weddings that we're talking about in this day and age, in the ancient Near East, they were a very, very different sort of a thing than the way that we celebrate. In the Middle East, weddings weren't a day and then finished. The weddings went on for sometimes days or weeks, depending on the wealth of the family and the amount of friends or family that they had. Weddings could potentially go on for a month. Like, it would have been extraordinary. The way that the Jewish people celebrate is actually something that I think we missed out in the way that we celebrate. We're sort of, okay, quick, let's get together, let's do something big, and then boom, and it's all done. But they just ramp it up and keep going. I think it'd be awesome. But it's very, very different. The bridesmaids in this story had a very, very different job to the job that bridesmaids in our Western culture have. The bridesmaids we have are meant to attend to the bride. That's why they call them bridesmaids. They're meant to be the maid to the bride. And what they're meant to do is to make sure that the bride has a great day, make sure that everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. They're meant to take care of her, helping her to get ready and to be on time for her wedding day. But in the ancient Near East, the bridesmaids were actually meant to attend to the groom. It was the family that took care of the bride. The sisters, the aunties, the mothers, the future mother-in-laws, they were all meant to attend to the bride and make sure all of that was happening. But the bridesmaids were actually meant to attend to the groom and make sure that he got to the wedding on time. As the groom travels to the home of his bride-to-be, which potentially could have been days away, like people came from all kinds of places to get married. They would wait for the groom to enter their town or city, and then via lamplight they would escort him to the home of his bride, where he would meet her and the celebrations would begin. So if the bridesmaids weren't really prepared for all kinds of different things to happen, like the bridegroom being late, they could be in quite a bit of trouble. And the Bible frequently uses this wedding imagery. Jesus used this a lot to describe his relationship with his people. In the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as the bridegroom, and the church, us, we are referred to as his bride. Even in the last couple of chapters of Revelation, that speaks of the bride being prepared to meet the groom, the Lamb of God. And in this parable, the bridegroom, again, is symbolic of the person of Jesus. He's putting himself in this story. And in this instance, the bridesmaids represent us as his followers, his people. And as we saw last week, Jesus is giving his disciples specifically a picture or creating an image of what to expect concerning the kingdom of God. And in this parable, he's telling his guys that the time frame that they're thinking about all of these things happening in case of the kingdom coming is not as important as their preparedness for it to come. They need to be ready when it does come, but being prepared for it rather than trying to work out when it's going to be here is what he's requiring. The point of the parable is that we need to stay alert. We need to be ready and prepared for Jesus' return, whether it be soon or a long time coming, because there's significant consequences for those who aren't ready and aren't prepared within themselves to receive him as their king. And when he comes to establish his kingdom and to fulfill all the prophecy about himself. The other reason we need to be prepared and alert is that while we wait, there's much to do. We're not just sitting around waiting for Jesus to appear. He's equipping us and helping us to understand that as he introduces the kingdom, we're meant to introduce the kingdom to others. So we need to be ready to do the things that he's given us to do. Just like the preparations for a wedding take a huge amount of time, so does living a life of faith and service in that kingdom. There's lots to prepare. There's lots of invitations to go out. There's heaps of people who aren't yet in the kingdom. And we're the ones who are tasked with the urgency and the task to invite them in. Jesus spoke about his followers being like a light to the world in Matthew chapter 5. He says there, "Let your light shine before others so that they can see your good deeds and glorify God." Your good deeds, the things that you do in the kingdom, is meant to reflect the person of Jesus in your life so that people see that and glorify God. And while we hold our lamps, we need to keep the oil up and the wicks trimmed so that they burn brightly, so that you don't get the smokiness that comes around with a wick that's not trimmed. I worked for 4.5 years, nearly 5 years, in a candle factory when we first got married, because there was we got married in 91, so the building industry was suffering under the weight of the recession we had to have. That was it. And a family friend got me a job in his candle factory, and I learnt so much about candles. I learnt that you actually have to keep the wicks trimmed on a candle as well as a lamp, because otherwise they just burn too quickly. You get too much flame and it doesn't burn the candle the way that it's supposed to do. So it's true, we need to be attentive to what's happening in our life in that way. The fact that we are the bride of Christ and our relationship with God is everything to us is what reflects to other people. When they see that we're sold out for God, that makes a difference to them. Whether they're on a spiritual journey or not, they can see a difference in people. But why did Jesus feel the need to tell them this story and give them this prophetic warning about being prepared? I think he knew that his disciples would struggle to stay on course. I think he knew that they would become easily distracted. I think he knew that the things that were about to happen in Jerusalem would actually shake their trust and their faith in him. The disciples would struggle to stay awake even as Jesus prayed in Gethsemane. It was that soon after he spoke about this. And I think he knows our propensity to get weary as well, doesn't he? To become drowsy, to become tired, to lose our energy. Jesus knows that happens for us. Things that draw us away from him and his calling on our lives are the things that he knows about. They're the things that he could he could really pick. And he also knew the fear that would overcome his followers when they failed to remember his words about rising on the third day. That went completely out of their heads once Jesus had been arrested. And sometimes we're a bit like that. We forget, that's right, Jesus is coming again. There is going to be a completion to this cycle of this introduction of the kingdom. This is going to happen, and we can trust Jesus to do that because that is his purpose. His disciples wouldn't remember the many times that Jesus explained what was going to happen and how he was going to overcome all of it, including death. Man, I would have thought that would have stuck in their heads. I would have thought it would stick in mine. But how often do I get distracted? How often do the voices crowding around me distract me from the voice of God and his message to me, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, trust me. Jesus knew that it would be challenging for the disciples to obey his command to go out from Jerusalem and into the regions surrounding them and further into the world. So he used this parable to reinforce that there was much to be done before the groom was going to come. And he was also addressing some of the behaviour of the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the time who were known for not practising what they preached. At times he called them vipers, he called them empty tombs, he whitewashed tombs. He insulted them directly to their face because of the behaviour that they exhibited. That's why they wanted to kill him, because he called them on stuff that was inappropriate. He called them on stuff because they weren't teaching their people, the people that they led, they weren't teaching them to look after the poor. They were teaching them to look after the temple, to look after the religion, to look after the structure that was meant to help them actually be the people of God that God wanted them to be. Their faith was all show on the outside, but underneath it was shallow and it was inauthentic. They were the ones who refused to take the oil with them because they thought they had it all in the bag. We're all good, we don't need to prepare for this. Aside from a real heart relationship with God, they had very little else to give. And they were shown to be left way short of having all that they needed in that time. And that's why every parable has this sting in the tail of it. It warns the ones who are found to be shallow and inauthentic that there's more required in that space. Jesus said, I know what's going on, guys. Let's change it up. Let's do something different. Don't keep going in these narrow pathways of religion. See that I'm here to bring life and life in abundance. Like God, Jesus wants us to have life in abundance, not just some routine, every day the same, every week the same. He wants us to live in a fullness that we can only find in relationship with him. Jesus warned them that not everyone who professes their faith in him with their lips would enter the kingdom of God. Some would find themselves on the outside looking in at the great celebration that's taking place. So as modern day followers of Jesus, this parable invites us to consider how we might be intentional about staying alert, about really seeking the things that God has given us to do and preparing well for living effective and fruitful lives now while we wait for him to come. So what do we do? What do we do to make sure that we can remain in a prepared and ready posture to both work and grow in our capacity to show our light and to be ready for the bridegroom? I think one of the first things is to actually pursue true discipleship. Not just calling ourselves Christian, not just saying, yeah, I'm a person of faith. That can be an easy label to handle. It can be an easy label to hold and actually not to live in a convicted way about. Are we committed to cultivating a real and living faith in Jesus? Real and living? Do we practice daily rhythms of time with Jesus in scripture, in prayer, in worship for ourselves? Or do we just leave that for the Sunday morning and tick a box when we leave church together? It's got to be more than that, right? But how often do we get distracted and there's stuff to do, there's busyness, there's work, there's family, there's health issues. All of these things help to distract us from maybe these moments are where we need to bring them before Jesus and say, Lord, I can't handle this. I need your help in all of these areas. Do we plant ourselves in community with others for accountability and encouragement? Have we joined a group and encouraged people to join a group with us to read the Word and to encourage each other in the Word, to pray for each other face to face and by name? There's a disturbing statistic that I heard a couple of weeks ago that said there's probably about 75% of people who actually attend church have never been prayed for by name before in their life. That's astounding to me. How have we let that statistic rise to such a level? And I know it's a massive generalisation to say that all churches are like this, but if we have statistics that support this kind of thing, then it's something we really do need to take note of. We need to start thinking about how can we at Frankston Church of Christ reduce that statistic in our area? How can we reduce that in our community here? Where two or three are gathered, the Lord comes. How can we invite a couple of people that you know who may be thinking about faith and maybe use an alpha program to just encourage them to be asking the questions that they might have inside but are too afraid to ask out loud? Sometimes having those questions out loud can give people such massive inroads into the faith in Jesus and relationship in Jesus. What's one way that God's inviting me to pursue true discipleship this year? What's the one thing that I can do that would make a difference in my discipleship? I think the second thing is to keep growing and maturing in our faith. I don't think we ever stop learning. I don't think we ever stop growing if we actually put our mind to it. We can stagnate and we can just get to a level and just go, I'm all good. Put my spiritual feet up and relax. I think Jesus wants us to understand the depth of the love that he has for us, the depth of what his sacrifice on the cross actually means practically for our lives and for the lives of others. How do we keep growing in that? Practice faithfulness in every season. Eugene Peterson, who produced the Message version of the Bible, quoted someone that the Christian faith is a long obedience in the same direction. It's about the kind of stamina of faith, that determined attitude to just keep at it in the same direction for a long, long time. And to keep growing, we need to stay teachable, don't we? We need to be able to say, I actually don't know everything yet. Like we haven't been revealed all that is to know in our faith. Desire wisdom. One of the incredible things about wisdom is that it gives you insight into so many other areas of your own life, of how life works, of how you need to actually understand who God is. You need to understand what his life can mean when it's outworked in your own life. It's about being intentional about your growth as a disciple. One of the things I've discovered in the past year is a group who've put a thing together called the Bible Project. And these guys have put together ways of looking at the Bible and understanding the Bible and learning about the history and the genres and the meanings and some of the context of the different biblical perspectives for people from kindergarten age right up to those in their 80s, 90s and 100s. They've done such a breadth of work, and so much of it is just incredible insight. And listening to some of their podcasts or some of the videos they do a lot of stuff pictorially too. For those who don't really learn academically, there's a lot of video and pictorial stuff that helps you just connect with it so well. I highly recommend, Google the Bible Project and just search the huge amount of resource that's there. It's fantastic. And it's fun. It's just really, really fun. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves some questions. Am I bearing fruit? Are the things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control, are they coming out of me? Or do people notice when I'm more impatient and ungracious and more selfish than I should be? Where do I need pruning so that I can be more fruitful in those spaces? Am I relying on past spiritual experiences, or am I actively seeking fresh encounters with God, new ways to encounter Him? Am I being obedient to what Jesus originally asked of me? Can you tell the difference between your calling and your assignment? One of the things that was a revelation to me was being on a course with the Arrow organisation, and they said one of the important things for you to discover as a leader is to actually discover what your calling is, what the main thing that you believe God has gifted you to do actually is, and then to work out what your assignments are, the places and the times that you get to work out your calling. And that was a revelation for me, understanding that I can have different assignments in different places at different times, but my calling can be the same thing in those different places and different times. Sometimes that's great for us to be able to work those things out. The third thing is be prepared for delays. Jesus was deliberate about saying, no one knows but the Father what's going to happen when. He goes, you don't need to worry about that stuff. But we do get worried about that stuff. So when we have a figure in mind or a date in mind, I'm quite sure the disciples wanted Jesus to open his Google Calendar and just give him a day. It's going to be November 30th at 10:57, guys. Get ready for that time. Can you imagine how complacent they would have been up until that day? They would have been just going, we're not going anywhere. We're just going to wait and just let the date roll around. It's really funny. But be prepared for delays. Invest in your spiritual habits that sustain you over time. It's your spiritual habits, the intentional things that you do to continue to grow your faith and your reliance on God that help you get through those times of waiting. Send your roots down deep. I love the direction that God gives his people, even when they were in exile in Jeremiah chapter 29. He says to them, plant crops. You're in exile, but he says, plant crops, have children, grow your families, build houses. And then he says, pray for the city. He says, you're in exile here, but you need to pray for this city that it will prosper, because then you will prosper. Because you're not just going to be thinking of, when are we going to get out of here? God, give us a date when we can get out of here and back to ours. He says, don't worry about that stuff. He goes, have a great life here. Build life here and have it in abundance. You can do that. Have your children. Raise them in faith in me, and don't get so stuck on getting out of here. He says this is an important thing. Where do you see the signs of spiritual fatigue or weariness in your life? In the delays, can you actually pick the points where you actually get really tired of it all? Where you actually get really weary of this journey of faith? I know it happens to all of us at different times. The important thing is to have the kind of disciplines built in that we can immediately go back to go, no, I can get through this, because he who is within me is stronger than the one who is in the world. He will strengthen me to get through this. What are the spiritual habits that you feel prompted to deepen or maybe recommit to? Things that you knew, oh wow, I remember when I was just so passionate about my prayer life or praying with other people, having that encouragement with others. Man, I remember that. Maybe it's time to get back to doing some of those things for yourselves. And live with urgency. We know that the time when Jesus returns is going to be a reality. He's promised it, so he's going to do it, because God doesn't lie. He says, I am returning. I am coming back. And so we can trust that. So make the most of every opportunity. When he said to the disciples, go into all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth, it took them ages for them to do that. When the persecutions broke out in Jerusalem, it was the other believers that scattered and went through and took the gospel. The disciples actually stayed in Jerusalem. Peter actually stayed there for nearly 15 years before the Lord sent his vision about on the rooftop about going to the Gentiles. Took a massive amount of time. Why? Because they didn't know or trust that Jesus was at his word in that space. He told them to go. He commanded them to go, and they stayed. It potentially could have halted the movement of the gospel and the birth of the church in that place. So God had to re-recruit Peter back into the job. He had to re-recruit him back into that space. So make the most of every opportunity. Love your neighbour today, not tomorrow, not next week or next year. Love them today. How does that work? Be a diligent steward of your gifts and resources, and be continually filled with the Spirit, that daily ongoing process of being filled and giving out and being filled and giving out. It's not a one-time event. Being filled with the Spirit is something that in our human weakness we need that daily. Daily. And maybe ask the question, who is it in your life that needs to hear about Jesus, and how might you be intentional about being open and available to share your time and your faith with them? One of the things that Mel often says is that the most precious thing you can give someone is your time. Because we've all got 24 hours, right? We've all got 24 hours, and the way that we spend it can be completely on ourselves and on our needs and on the things that we need to do that are important. But man, what if we gave an hour to someone else to improve their day, to pray for them, to pat their dog, and then spend time reading the Word with them? What if we did that? Jesus' purpose in coming to earth was to introduce his kingdom to us, and our purpose is to introduce that kingdom to the people around us as we anticipate his coming. He said to his disciples, don't worry about the day or the time, but be prepared, be ready. Keep your wicks trimmed and the oil ready to refill. Let's go. He encouraged them to be prepared, and he encourages us to be the same way. So let's be prepared each and every day to do that. Let's worship him again and just remind ourselves of how good he is to us and how much of our life we owe to him. And let's take him at his word. The parables were to instruct us on how to live in his kingdom right now. And so let's take note of that. Thanks, team.